And now it's live. Okay, so welcome to Sierra Nova Comics Podcast.
Episode 1, but it's
Episode
1. Today we actually have Todd Rayner, the creator of Icepick.
Yep.
Yes. And haven't you done like other comics too? Because I've seen your name on like other comics at the end of Icepick.
Yeah, I've done some indie work for Enterlight Studios. So Templar, Project Archangel, did a graphic novel for Arcana years ago. Some stuff for Blue Water Productions, I do believe, before they changed names. I'm not sure what they are now. So just indie work, a lot of indie work.
Cool. So we have a couple questions and we'll just get right into it.
Sure.
What got you into comics?
Well, that was as most kids, I would say. I was a kid. I was a teenager, and actually,
I think most people probably started off like that.
I was born.
Yeah, I mean, it was my dad at the time just would buy old G.I. Joe comics. We're talking like, I don't know, around issues 20-ish, so we're talking the silent issue and just going on from there. And, it was just a monthly thing that I did. And then, late 80s, early 90s hit with Image, and that really kind of opened up my eyes. McFarlane's Spider-Man issue 1 was there when that issue dropped, and just followed those guys and just blossomed from there.
Oh, awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah. The only comic that I actually own personally that's not indie is Spectacular Spider-Man. So,
yeah, it took me years to really. I originally from Ohio. I live now in Seattle area, so it's just a lifestyle change. But there wasn't conventions. We're talking like late 80s, early 90s. There was nothing there for me to go out and meet these guys. So I would read it in Wizard magazine. Like, what are the guys doing in California? What are the Image guys doing? And, who are the hot artists? What are the hot books? And so finally got to meet McFarlane a couple years ago up in Seattle.
Very cool.
So, yeah, it was exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so your mainstream comic, Icepick, like the one that is your main focus. Tell us what it's all about. Like, how did you get into that?
Yeah, Icepick is a definite throwback to that era of comics. We're talking, superhero comics kind of starts out that way. Huge fan of SNC Max as well, and I pull from a lot of different influences. So it starts out as a revenge story, as your main character Icepick is left for dead, basically, and his parents were murdered. So he kind of wakes up from being left for dead, and I don't want to give away too much of the story, but it starts out where he has his powers. He doesn't know really how he got them, how to use them, and he's trying to find out who killed his parents and who was behind his, assassination attempt. And it starts out issue 1 is there, so there's a lot of kind of mystery behind it. You learn that his parents were murdered, and that's where the story picks up at. Issue 2 is out as well, and issue 2 kind of progresses that story. You learn a little bit more of who the bad guy is. His name's Freak. Who's behind him? I pull in influence from Dante's Inferno, like supernatural type of stuff. So there's demons, there's angels, it is an open book on everything. Yeah, I don't limit the story. There's only 2 issues out. I'm working on issue 3, but the ideas of what I want to do with this story is, it's open for everything. So there's a little bit of superhero stuff in there. There's some supernatural stuff in there. There's, just all kinds of undertones and a lot of influences. We're talking Spawn influences, Batman, even Wolverine kind of stuff, and just SNC Max, those kind of influences on storytelling, on everything, artwork, and just everything in general.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Is the superhero genre like your favorite, or do you have like a actual favorite?
That's probably most, yeah, that's probably most of what I buy is superhero genre. I mean, right now I do buy a lot more indie than I do probably mainstream titles, you know, and being an indie creator, we tend to flock towards, you know, supporting other creators and other people trying to make this a living. This is not, you know, my living. That would be the dream, right? You know, to not necessarily even be as big as some of these indie creators, but to just have this as a full-time job and make a decent living. But, you know, I've been growing support over the years, but, you know, superhero genre is definitely probably my favorite, I would say, you know.
Do you have a second favorite you go to, like, you know, horror, what is it, the old history, anything like that?
Yeah, I like, well, so for films, I love sci-fi fantasy type of stuff. So I kind of gravitate towards those as well. Like, you know, there's just some of the sci-fi stories out there. My wife loves Saga, and I've kind of read a little bit about that. But, you know, I would say sci-fi would probably be the other genre I tend to, or you're talking like steampunk kind of stuff.
Do you think that changes how you design your work versus the work that you've originally like idled off of? So like
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even what is it? Joe Benitez has Lady Mechanica, I think is how you say it. But you know, big fan of that book. So I mean, that's a huge steampunk type of alternate reality type of book, and just his art in general. I mean, I there's so many guys as an artist, and kind of dipping my hands into writing. You know, there's a lot of influences out there. So you know, I look at, now that I'm creating a book, I look at everything that goes into making a book. It's not just, for me, when I go buy a book or follow a story character, it's not like, oh, this is the new Batman title, and I don't care who's working on it. You know, it's Batman or it's Spider-Man or whatever. You know, Wolverine's back, so whoever's doing Wolverine. I don't do that. I've never been that type of comic book reader. I've always been, I would follow artists or follow writers, and when they jump titles is when I would jump. Sometimes I'll hang on for a couple issues to see where it goes or see who the new writer artist kind of team is. But, you know, now that I'm creating a book, it's about how are they laying out their pages? How are they telling this story? You know, so there's that aspect of influences.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Actually, on that, how do you feel personally about bringing a character back, like Wolverine or anything? Because in our comics, once a character dies, they're dead. So
it depends on the character. So someone like Wolverine, it's an interesting dilemma, I guess. Like, how do you keep readership or increase readership? It's a business, right? So I get there's a huge fan. I mean, Wolverine's part of my holy trinity. I mean, so I get it. Like Wolverine, Batman, Spider-Man. Granted, they're all dudes, but you know, there's a lot of women people, you know, superheroes out there. I love Fathom is one for sure, but you know, it's Wolverine. You can kind of bring him back on a certain level. You know, a character like Batman, where he's human, he doesn't have superpowers, and if he dies, I would say he should stay dead. Someone else can pick up that mantle of Batman. You know, because there is no radioactive spider, there is no, you know, the sun is giving me powers type of thing. You know, it's not a superhero, supernatural type of superhero. He's just a man that's, you know, has strength and smarts and gadgets, right? So I would say that in my book. Like my book, you know, Freak is a villain, and you'll learn in issue 3 that I'm actually inking now. I'm about halfway done with the inks. He is a super powered super villain, right? So, you know, I don't want to give kind of too much away, but if I were to kill him off without his powers, he couldn't come back. But because he has these powers, the powers that be can always bring him back. So it just depends on the character. I'm not a huge fan of it, but depending on the character, you know, I could be okay with it.
The more the limitations of like the character's actual storyline, not the fact that you're bringing him back just because fans might want them to come back, so you make up a reason why.
Oh, absolutely. And I would never, like, I would try to never do that. You know, I know we say this is like, you know, guys that were indie creators, and we have these books, and we want to do it a certain way. And you know, McFarlane was a pioneer in that, and that's why he's probably my biggest influence, is not only art wise, storytelling wise, but business model, businessman wise. You know, it's, you don't do things just because there's pressure from the business side of it. You know, you want to try to stay true to the character and true to the story type of thing.
Yeah. You wanna go?
Sure. So we just wanted to, have you talk about self-publishing. Just, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a big question here.
Yeah.
I would say, so I go back to, what's really funny is I created Icepick, back when I was 15, 16-ish. So we're talking many, many, many years ago, and, mid 90s-ish. And there was no way for anyone to publish books outside of Marvel, DC. Malibu Comics started working early on with Image. So that was an avenue that started to be explored. The last, I'd say 5 to 7 years, maybe 6 to 8 years, there's just been so many ways to self-publish. And, it's interesting because, especially, we kind of touch on some of the crowdfunding platforms, Indiegogo, Kickstarter. Without those, I feel it would be really tough to indie publish. But, for me, it was one of those things where I worked on some indie books, wasn't really kind of building up steam enough for me to get hired in on any of the bigger indie companies. So I just said, what the hell, let me just do my character, my book. I rewrote it from what I did originally back when I was a teenager, and, made things more relevant, felt that all the skills that needed writing all the way up to lettering, I was adequate at, somewhat, I was at least good enough. And, working in the indie business kind of gave me that savviness to say, yeah, I can do this. There's places like Kablam is where I started doing it. And then it was, you got to get out there and get to the conventions. A lot of indie publishers, a lot of indie creators, that's one thing that I can't stress enough. I only do a few conventions a year, 3 or 4. I might be doing a 5th one this year, but that's where you connect with the fans. That's where, to me, that consistent fan base is going to grow if you do more shows. And unfortunately, there's expenses with those. You got to spend money to make money, and a lot of the indie publishers just don't have, the $1,000 or even $500 to go out to do a show. So I get it. It's the struggles are real for indie publishers, but I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of people to get out there and tell their stories, whether it's good or bad. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
With all that good that's out there, there's definitely there's some so-so books, and you're just like, okay. That's awesome that you were able to do that. And without these platforms, we wouldn't have these opportunities.
Absolutely. And even if it's not good writing to begin with, it's also a great way to find that out. Like, some people, could have it in their head that they're great writers, or have no idea in their head whether or not they're good or not. And once you put that out there, you can really learn from what you're doing and what others are doing, whether or not your content is good for other people to consume. So it's a good way to also either make yourself better, or change your path if you realize, oh well, I wasn't that interested and I'm not that good, so maybe I don't roll down this path. Or maybe if I just do work a little harder on my writing, then I can actually get somewhere with this.
Yeah, I would agree with that subject. It's interesting because, kind of a funny story is, a couple years ago when I first released issue 1, I very scared. That was like, this is your baby, your idea, your character, and there's a show in Spokane, Washington, which is from the Seattle area. You're talking, it's a good 5-hour drive. So that just gives you an idea of, like, I drove 5 hours to do this show, and lo and behold,
sure, you're thinking about it the whole drive.
Who shows up was Steve Furco. And so those that maybe don't know, he is a coloring vet, right? He did a lot of stuff in the 90s. I had no idea he was going to be there. He was a fan. I mean, he was a customer type of thing. Like
That's awesome.
Yeah, he came in and bought his ticket, and he comes up to the booth, and he kind of looked a little familiar because, I mean, again, like we're talking like mid 90s, there wasn't the social media platforms.
Yeah, you can't tell what people look like. You just saw their work.
Right. And you're like, oh, and so he comes up and he's flipping through some of the books that I did, mostly the coloring books for like Templar and Project Archangel. He's like, yeah, I kind of like this. And so I think he bought Templar and Archangel, which was interesting. And then I started pitching Icepick to him, and I'm talking about that. And I was like, well, this is my book. I'm doing everything, right? And so he's flipping through it, and he buys, a couple different variants and this and that. And then he's like, oh yeah. I was like, Steve? And he's like, oh yeah, Steve Furco. I'm like, are you kidding me? Right? So you just never know who you meet at these shows. And it just goes to show, like, it was scary for me to release it, but then to get it in front of someone like that, and come to find out he lived in the Seattle area and he made that drive as well. And so long story short is issue 1, scared as hell to release it. I release it. Someone of, comic book notoriety buys it. And then he even messaged me and was like, oh, I really love the book. It's great. And to your point about,
incredible. That's awesome.
It was a really cool story, but he said, my only criticism is that there were some times where I just wasn't 100% sure of like where the story was going, or I kind of had to like go back a couple pages to look. And that's that self-critiquing, like you said, like, well, I'm not
better to get it from, right?
Yeah. So it made me kind of look back and reread the issue and say, okay, where are those moments, and apply that knowledge to issue 2. So the flow is a lot better in issue 2 and even in issue 3. And, just what every artist says is draw more, you'll get better. So just by me doing this, it's gotten better from issue 1 to 2 to 3, so there's always hope. So if you feel you don't have that confidence, do it, put it out there, because who knows who's going to look at it, who knows who's going to see it, and who knows who's going to like it,
Yeah, and that works for all the crafts, even writing. Like most really great writers say, write every day, and people are like, oh, well, I can't think of what to write about. Write about what you can't think about what to write about. Just write about anything until you get the words flowing. That's the key to getting good at any craft.
Yeah, look out the window and verify what you see.
Yeah.
It literally takes like one person to see your thing, and then they're like, "Oh shit, this is like amazing." Like,
yeah, and that's it's you just have those moments where maybe as an artist I struggle at drawing faces, but the more you draw, it's just slowly start to process it a little bit differently. You watch videos, writing. This may be my story, and that's great, but how do you like get into the details of telling that story that makes sense to the reader?
Yeah.
Well, the other cool thing too is not just conventions. Now with like social media, you can get your work in front of an audience before it's even finished. So you can have a lot of your your drawings, your sketches, all the stuff that is so often like not seen in the back end. So people might not just fall in love with your story. They might fall in love with the story to write the story. And so it does seem like indie creators are now at like the prime time to get out there. Because even though everyone's on social media, not everyone's promoting on social media yet.
Right.
So it's very cool. Like you can really get in front of some people. Even like this, like podcast, for example, it's a great way to get in front of people. Way before everyone eventually figures it out.
Yeah, it's a tough balance of spending enough time working on things and getting your work done. As far as the artwork, the writing, all those things, and then being able to do the shows and also promote on social media. And, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. There's a lot of negativity out there, but there's also a lot of positive, feedback and, new people that just don't know. They follow a hashtag and you're always hashtagging that one thing, as broad as comics can be a hashtag. People follow it and, you gain viewership just on that one thing. So it definitely is important. As an indie creator, I don't feel that we're all gonna make a ton of money at it, but we're doing what we enjoy. And I think that's, to me, that's really what's important. Is just telling
yeah,
stories.
even if you can't make like wealth off of it, if you can make a living off of doing what you do, like there's people that would take a 20% cut in their current paycheck if they could do what they love and do it instead.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you could instead take, maybe not 20%, but if you could take a 10% cut on your current income and instead be paid all the rest of that 90% from just working on comics, like that's like such an easy choice for so many artists, creators, writers, that would be an incredible thing to do.
Definitely. And that's the side of it comes into play, is you have to balance. I mean, I've crunched the numbers for the last 2 years since I've been doing Icepick. It's what do I need to make on a day-to-day basis? This is what I make in my day job, X amount of money per 8 hours put in, or per whatever, 10 hours. And how does that translate? And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of indie creators, there's not necessarily the support from your local store so much. And there's a lot of nuances in self-publishing that no one really talks about. How do you price your books? How do you, what's a good number to print? Are you printing 25 copies? Are you printing 1,500 copies? What's the value of printing more for a whole year worth of maybe doing conventions? Or, you need to get barcodes on your books so that you can put them in stores. Those are the little nuances that,
oh yeah,
and I think if there's a kind of a company or a person that can help bridge that gap with indie creators that we can go to, that would be a huge step in the right direction to kind of breaking that tether with Diamond. Because, luckily here up in the Northwest, there is a different distributor of comics, but I mean, for most people, it's Diamond. If you get turned down from Diamond, you're only doing indie publishing on a very small scale. And you're never going to make that money. You're never going to make that 90% or even 50% of your pay because you're not in Diamond.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that we're hoping to help be able to bridge that gap. So that's definitely we definitely see that in a lot of creators that just don't know how to get to the level they need to without being forced to kowtow to certain companies.
Exactly. And I would even say it's there's a lot of good books out there that no one knows about. Yeah,
absolutely. It's like what is it? One of the people I follow, Gary Vaynerchuk, says the 5 best Prince songs might never have been made, right? And that was from someone who was big. Maybe he just sat on a shelf. But there's people who've already created something and it's out there, but it's not on the right shelf in front of the right person at the right time. And it's like, if you can get a larger global push for the content you've created, like you can find those random niches of people that really would enjoy your work.
Yeah, and a lot of the number crunching comes down to being able to possibly sell 3,000 to 5,000 books a month. And as a indie creator, that's where I've done my research, is that's where the magic number kind of becomes. Once you hit that 3,000, 5,000 mark, then you start building that fan base, and that becomes a monthly source of income. Once you, and that seems like a lot, but you could easily do 1 or 2 shows a year, sell a few hundred at the show, if you're that, there. But you got to get into Diamond. You got to have this distribution. You got to, be in 10,000 stores or something like that. You know what I mean? It's just a numbers game.
Yeah, well, the other thing too, a lot of people, like, it's same in like the music industry. Like, it's hard to, if you're only making 1 album a year, as opposed to like, for comic books, you could potentially make way more than that. But like for musicians, they'll make 1 album a year because it'll take all the time to write it, record it, produce it, master it. And they're like, how do I make a ton of money off of $10 an album? And so the other thing too is like pushing merchandise and other things that they can support you with. So that's the other thing I've noticed. A lot of indie creators, they try to get to just the comic number, but there's also other numbers they can reach. Because if somebody, actually, I'll give a shout out to this just because I was talking with Greg about this earlier. There's an article by an entrepreneur called Kevin, or his name's Kevin Kelly, and the article's called 1,000 True Fans.
We're really about to talk about that.
Yeah, and that's like a huge thing, is that if you can get a true fan is someone that no matter what you create, they will buy it, right? Yeah, super fan. And so the whole point is that if you, yeah, super fan, superheroes. But basically, if you have enough, like if you can only put out 12 comics a year, right, one a month, which is, you know, for some people that is actually very hard to do. But let's say you get one a month, and they only sell for $5, and you sell, you know, 1,000 of them a month, you're still limited on how much you're making. And then, but if you're putting on top of that, like, oh, we've got, you know, T-shirts, or we've got posters, right? Like, you know, what is the IT Comics poster up here? You know, aside from just the comics, so there's more that you can push from you, and that's why, like I was saying before, like having yourself, by going to conventions, by going and introducing yourself as a person, not just the artwork you're producing, you can connect with people who want to support you, and will do so if you have some way to be supported, not just buying 50 versions of your one comic book. There's other things that you can sell too.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. I mean, I do have some, you know, I feel some of the merchandise is more valuable to some people than it is to others. So it's always finding that right merchandise for that right person at that right time. You know, having Icepick prints at a show is great, but no one knows who that is. So they look at the book, they buy the book, then they come back the next show and they're like, oh, I like it, I want that print, or, you know, whatever it is that I got, you know. And free stuff always helps, brings people to shows and brings you to your table at least. But, you know, it's definitely a hit or miss type of game. But as a creator, it's like, if you're doing pencils, yeah, one book a month is pretty, I don't say average, I guess, a page a day type of thing. But, you know, doing inks and colors and writing and lettering, you know, that just stretches out that whole timeline, you know. So it's interesting, but there's definitely avenues to help bring in that extra source of income. So, you know, you talk about like crowdfunding, you know, you could do a pin up and that's a print, or that print also becomes a mini print or a metal print, or it becomes a trading card. It becomes other things, so that one piece of art has 5 different avenues that people are interested in. You know, so it's thinking a little bit outside the box, like how can I maximize my time into multiple things?
Yeah, like one piece of artwork, but use it across multiple.
Right.
Yeah.
To get back onto crowdfunding, Indiegogo and Kickstarter, because there's actually like a ton of other crowdfunding things like Crowdfunder and
GoFundMe.
All
there's a bunch of them.
I know that you were on Indiegogo a while ago, and you were struggling at the end. I don't know if you got it funded all the way, or
I think I was a little short, but you know, that's the interesting thing. So, you know, I did some research, so we'll kind of go back just a bit. It does take me a while to get an issue out. That's one thing I never kind of shy away from when I'm talking to fans. You know, it shows it's like, yeah, maybe in 10 months, a year, I'll have another issue. You know? So it was a while ago. I did Kickstarter at first. It was the larger platform, I felt, and there was more support there. The research I was able to do, and this is maybe insight for people that maybe want to do their first Kickstarter or their first Indiegogo, first crowdfunding type of book. You know, a lot of books tend to start out at that $3,000 to $5,000 range, and some of them have teams attached to them. Some of them have other cover artists. Some of them have, maybe it's 1 or 2 people, but it was always, I found it pretty consistent, that $3,000 to $5,000 range. So I started with Kickstarter. I think I did $1,000 and I missed that mark. I got a little over 800, which was impressive. But with Kickstarter, the way it's structured is, at least back then, it was, maybe they changed it, but if you didn't make your mark, that was it. You know, you really didn't.
It's still like that. Yeah, if you don't make it, it's the all or nothing principle. Yeah.
Right. And so then I started researching Indiegogo, and I felt like, okay, even if I don't make my mark, I can still have something to help with the printing of everything. And I issue 2, I kind of expanded quite a bit from issue 1. I had 4 other artists involved, and I had a guy that did, one of my high school buddies, did a 3D cover, a very retro, like red, blue, the glasses. It comes with the glasses, and it is a unbelievable cover. That's actually my best-selling cover, oddly enough, it shows. And, you know, so I had like 4 covers. I did all this stuff, you know, and barely missed the mark, but I was still able to kind of receive that funding. And so that was the nice thing with Indiegogo. But again, it depends on your fan base. It depends on what you're really looking to do. I'm probably going to go back to Indiegogo for issue 3, which actually, oddly enough, we'll be launching that next month. I haven't really nailed down a date yet because I'm hoping for 2 shows in early September. One will be RenCon, which is in Renton, Washington. And then the other one will be Rose City Comic Con, which is in Portland. That's a big one. But RenCon is one of those cons it's in its 4th year. It's a smaller con. I did the cover for this convention. I'm doing some of the marketing and design work for them. So they're really like, oh, we need all the skills we can get to really push this convention. And Renton, for those that don't know, is a suburb. It's in the Seattle area, so they tend to compete with Emerald City Comic Con. And it's like, I think it's in a good time of the year because Emerald City isn't until next March, usually February, March. But I should be at both those shows, so I wanted to launch this Indiegogo right while I'm at those shows to let people know, like, if you want more than what I got here, go to the
support me here.
And I tend to have I'm going to try to expand it a little bit more for this Indiegogo. Maybe do a deck of cards. We'll have trading cards, just random fun stuff, buttons or patches or whatever, that kind of stuff that people like, because that's really what helped on the Indiegogo when I did issue 2 is people really like the bookmarks and they like the stickers and the variant covers and stuff. I am going to have 1 variant cover for this. I may have 2, but I am having a buddy of mine do another variant cover for issue 3. So we're going to keep that trend going.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, they actually do like backers, like creative kind of rewards and stuff. Because I learned from a couple people, Travis Gibb. Mm-hmm. He makes Broke Down and 4 Dead Bodies, and then the second one is 5 Dead Bodies. It's actually a pretty good comic. His one perk thing on his Kickstarter for the second one, I think, was air freshener for your car.
Yeah.
It was awesome. So like little
5 Dead Bodies.
So stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, as a consumer, as a backer, it's great. You're getting, maybe you're spending $5 on a comic, you spend $10 on a variant, but what else is there? You $10 on a print usually for shows, and I had mini prints as well that worked out really well. I did sketch cards because I do a lot of work for Tops and, I've worked for Upper Deck in the past. So, I just have that fan base of sketch card people that, oh yeah, you worked on that Star Wars set or that Garbage Pail Kid set or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, you worked on that set and I'm a fan of your work. So that brings another avenue. And I think that's important for creators is to not, if you're an artist, there's so many avenues to get your art out there. If you're a writer, it's probably a little more limited. I'm not pushing myself as a writer, so I have no idea what the writers do out there. But as an artist, I know that
Facebook groups.
It's like novels or comics, screenwriting. There's, I would say, less avenues, and especially less avenues to freelance work. But as an artist, there's a ton of avenues to freelance. There's just finding random people that want to commission you. So there's a lot of different avenues to build your fan base, and crowdfunding is definitely one of those sources because now I have fans that follow me on social media because they back me on these crowdfunding websites, Indiegogo. It's interesting that to just continue to build that brand, build the fan base.
Yeah. You have anything else?
I wanted to ask that, right? So, so I guess for a little final thing, just for anyone who is looking to create their own comics, we just wanted to ask, what are like the programs you use, the tools you use, the resources you go to, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's great. That's always a question. Everybody gets that question at shows. I even get that question like, I'm using this pencil at a show, and they're like, "What are you using?" I'll say, "This pencil." But yeah, I'm more of a Mac guy, so obviously, computer is key. You can do this all by hand. I don't feel that, the tools limit anyone. I know. the lady that worked. What's that?
Black Fly Press. He actually does like everything by hand.
Yeah, and that's crazy. And I was gonna say the lady that worked on the Fathom series, Siom, I think is her name. She does all the artwork by hand, and then she watercolors it. So I'm assuming they scan it in and then do digital lettering. And obviously, you know, you got to send a digital file to the printer. So there is that aspect. But I'm more of a Mac guy, so I have a Mac. I use, obviously, pretty much, you go down the list of all the standard programs. I use Photoshop for all my digital coloring. I've been using that program for, you know, gosh, 13, 14 years. And I'm just very comfortable in it. I know people use Clip Studio Paint, which is another really good one. I use that for inking. I think the inking tools in Clip Studio are better and they give you a more natural feel if I want to do digital inking. For Icepick, I'm doing everything traditional. So I would say, at least for that book, I do all my layouts digitally in Photoshop. I look up any references I need or pull ideas and things like that. I kind of do a sketch layout in Photoshop, print that out on 11 by 17. I light table that onto my comic artboard. And then I go ahead and once that's light table, I'll do my pencils. Once the pencils are done, then I scan those in. I change the pencil line art to a blue line, and then I print that out and I'll ink over the blue line. That's a very kind of an old school way. A lot of artists used to actually draw in blue line because it was non-photo. It wouldn't reproduce on a photocopier machine. Nowadays with computer and digitization and all that, you know, I like to do that so that I have the original pencils and the original inks, and I'm hand inking everything. Once the inks are done, scan them in, color them, you know, take that file, letter it, shrink it down to the proper size. And I built templates for everything, so I'm literally just dragging and dropping stuff so that it's the right size. I try to make the workflow as easy as possible since I'm the only guy doing it. And, you know, other than that, I just send it off and I use Ready Comics to print with. They are a fantastic company. They're West Coast, so I mean, I know a lot of people kind of, you know, depending on where they live, there's a lot of East Coast companies, a lot of West Coast companies. I met one of the ladies that worked at Ready Comics at a convention. Oddly enough, I've done some work for Rob Michaels, and it was like his girlfriend at the time, now his fiance. So she worked there, and he's like, this is where I get all my stuff printed. I'm like, well, okay, I'll check them out. And I mean, this was years ago, and then it just blossomed into this great relationship with them. And now they're expanding a lot of their stuff. So, I mean, good quality. People have said they're a little overpriced, but I'm a firm believer you pay for what you get for, you know, and if you're paying for quality, I expect quality, and they deliver. You know, I've never.
Well, not only that, they're very nice with the fact that you can set up drop shipping with like a single print copies going out, and so yeah, they might be a little overpriced, but they also have like tons of other available options that, you know, you could bulk order if you want and drop the price drastically, or you even have the option if you really wanted to, you could print for every single person that buys one, which is incredibly useful for indie creators who are just starting off, especially if they're doing all the artwork and all the writing themselves. Then you have no upfront cost until the actual print occurs. And then if you get a big fan base off of those few prints, you can now start bulk printing. And so you could like start small, get a taste, like we were saying earlier, just make your first one. And once that's made, you know, now you can start, you know, knowing, oh, okay, when I make a new one and I sell about 600 of them, well, now you can bulk order those ahead of time. As well, you get to, you know, test it without having to be settled in with, oh, I need to buy 1,500 copies for it to even be worth it for the company, which many, you know, big printers will do that. They put a minimum size print on it.
They do. That's the thing with them. I really enjoy their flexibility. You know, they just have the most options available for me. And, you know, I even, you know, kind of compared them with another, you know, on-demand print and company that it just kind of go back and forth. And I was comparing page by page, and their blacks were darker, their pages were a little bit cleaner looking, you know. And so for me, like, that's just what I use. That's what I like. And I'm starting to do prints through them as well, like 11 by 17 prints for shows, a lot of fan art prints. And that quality is phenomenal as well. I don't know why it took me so long to go through them in the first place, but you know, they're just great, you know, and I usually get orders, you know, within a day. They respond back to me with proofs, and then bam, within a week or two, I have my stuff. And like you said, they'll even meet me at shows if I need to. If I'm running, you know, a little late on deadlines, they're there with a box. Here's all your books. Here's all your stuff. You're good to go. You know, so
yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah, it's great. But so I do use Photoshop. I use Copic markers is what I use for a lot of inking. I use, oddly enough, I'm going to slide back here. I use these, I don't know if you can see, these very old school precise
yeah.
fine pens. They're probably terrible ink. I mean, it's probably like the ink will fade over time. But I use those pens.
Scanners are for.
Yeah. And I use those for pretty much everything. Over the years, I like the flow of the ink. And for me, like any artist will tell you, you know, it's like, you got to get comfortable with your tools. And what a lot of the inkers use, they become comfortable with that, whether it's that nib or that brush or that marker or technical pen. You know, that's just what I use. I've been using it since I was a kid, honestly. Like, it just, the ink flow is really good. Do
you use any digital drawing tools?
I do have a Wacom tablet that's pretty old. Geez, it's like I think an Intuos 4.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask if it was the Intuos or the, what is it, the Syntex, the screen one. So you're using the, what is it, it's just the blackboard, right?
Yeah. It's literally a tablet, and it's roughly 8.5, well, a little bit bigger. It's the 9x13 one, and it's just black. Yeah, it sits on my desk, and I've gotten the hand, you know, and honestly, a lot of people struggle using that at first because they're looking at a computer screen and they're using their hand and not looking down at their art. They're looking up. So there's that hand-eye coordination that sometimes throws them off a little bit, you know, and I have considered, grading to a new, like a screen one.
The Syntex, those things are incredible. I got to try their newest version at last year's New York Comic Con. They had their whole booth set up, so I was using it there, and I'm like, this is incredible.
It is, but I'm also kind of interested because Adobe, you know, granted, we can, you know, people have all kinds of opinions about Adobe subscription and whatnot, good or bad, or, you know, Photoshop being buggy and laggy. But again, that's what I'm.
Do you use the Creative Cloud, or do you use one of the older versions?
Well, okay. So long story short is I was on the CS versions, and I did use the Creative Suites for quite a while. And they came out with I think one of the cloud versions came out, and you could rotate the canvas. And I think Clip Studio Paint, which used to be Manga Studio, used to do that. And it was just like a rotation of the actual palette that you're working on. And that sold me on upgrading to the Creative Cloud. So I'm like, yeah, I need that.
You know, it's funny, actually. I found out that with a Wacom pad, the CS6 version can do that. It can rotate the canvas.
That's cool.
Because I didn't even realize that was. I didn't even think about the fact that that would be an option. You know what I mean? And then one day, I think I just leaned on it, and I was like, whoa, what happened? And the canvas was all skewed. But I found out that like some of the features without something like a Wacom tablet, without like something that could sense touch and motion, some of the features in Photoshop aren't even available. They're not even unlocked. So that was pretty interesting.
It is. And I mean, I've always rotated my hand when I'm inking, you know, like physical paper, I rotate that around to keep my hand in a comfortable position. And especially when I'm inking, to move away from a recently inked section so that it has time to dry before I smear it.
Yeah, so you get used to that even on digital. Yeah, even though it's not necessary. I don't actually erase it.
And so, yeah, I'm in the Creative Cloud, and, you know, the Cintiqs are just a little out of my price range. But, you know, I mean,
they're a little,
they are a little pricey. But yeah, and I have custom brushes I use, as with a lot of digital artists. But, you know, I'm always looking to improve and see what's out there. So I watch a lot of videos. I watch a lot of tutorials. I pay attention to what the industry is doing. you know, and
Do
where
you have any go-to artists on, like, say, YouTube that you go to watch what they're doing or like learn from?
honestly, any of the people I would find on YouTube, I find via social media, mostly Facebook. So it's just random people. You know, there's no one that really comes to mind because it's just so many random people. Like this guy's got one trick and this guy does another trick. So, you know, some of them are pros, some of them are not. And honestly, it's just a random selection of dudes or people that I find. But you know, it is interesting to say the least. Like a lot of the softwares, you know, what do people use? What are their specs? You know, a lot of the minimum specs are going to get you any of the software available. You know, you're going to be able to use that, and it's not a big deal. You know, I am curious. There's supposed to be a new update for with what Macs are doing and what Adobe's doing, and you're supposed to be able to use an iPad Pro for another screen. And they're supposed to release a full version of Adobe Photoshop on the iPad. So for me as a Mac user, I find that just amazing.
Enticing. Yeah.
Very enticing. And
have you played with Procreate at all?
Not yet. That's another software. And I know Clip Studio is available on the iPad Pro. And I do use an iPad Pro. So when I'm at conventions, sometimes if I'm working on a sketch cover, I need to pull maybe a reference or I need to look something up. I mean, I've even sketched out stuff on the iPad Pro in Adobe Sketch, which is okay. It's not, to me, it's not great. But if I had it Photoshop, I'm bringing my Photoshop files in and I'm coloring the next issue at a show.
Yeah, you know? Exactly. Like that's when I heard that they were adding Photoshop, I was like, oh, like, because you know it's going to be part of the Creative Cloud, and I like I said, I bought the CS6 version after the Creative Cloud came out. I was like, I'm not paying monthly for this, but then I see stuff like that come out, and I'm like, that's so like useful. Like that's if that's where they like came out with the Creative Cloud, they might have snagged me early, but like that's so powerful. It's like basically getting a Cintiq. Without having to buy that and Photoshop, you get that with your iPad, which people have for other reasons.
Right, and that's if you don't have an iPad, yeah, you obviously gotta buy on that, and just where technology's going, you know, I use technology as a tool. I don't use it as a crutch. A lot of artists sometimes will. It almost becomes a crutch to them where it's like they can only do it this way because that's what they know. And for me, it's always about learning new things. It's about learning, you know, new layout ideas or new design ideas, you know, learning software updates. What's new in the software? Will this help or make my workflow quicker, easier, or more efficient, and that type of thing. You know, and I pull from a lot of media references. So I'm a huge film guy. So I mean, I was watching Daredevil season 2, I do believe, end of season 1 into season 2, and I mean, there's ideas where it's like how they handled some of the cinematics and just the way they approached a scene in those episodes.
Yeah, like the angles, the lighting, and all that stuff.
I mean, I actually use that in issue 2 of Icepick, you know, so it's like, don't be afraid to look outside the box. And how do they go from scene to scene to scene, and how are they cutting to get that message across, get that story across? So that's how I do a lot of layouts is, you know, a lot of them are influenced from film, not necessarily from looking at my old comic books, because they could squeeze 13 panels into one page, and you're like, I don't need 13 panels. I can do this in 5.
Well, it's interesting because I actually found this out when I was in what was it, Sony? I think it was Sony. Pretty sure it was Sony Picture Studios, whatever it's called. In LA, they have like a museum where you can look at everything. And I found, or Warner Brothers is where it is. Yes, The Matrix, right? That was Warner Brothers. Yeah. So they had a storyboard, and it turns out that the Matrix movie was actually created as a comic book to pitch the movie. So if you look at the old sketchboards, it's written out like a comic book, not like a standard sketchboard is for a movie. And so it's very funny, like that you mentioned that you're going the reverse with it, which is really cool. Like there's a lot of cinematic views where, like in that movie alone, like that, like the, I forgot what it's called, but that 360 view they do right in the beginning when, you know, Trinity jumps in the air. Like that's something that you can replicate parts of that in comic books to get that similar effect. And so it's very cool, you know, that you're grabbing those kind of ideas.
Yeah, and I mean, my wife is she's got her bachelor's in photography, so there's a lot of photography rules that I pull as well in reference from rule of thirds. You know, how do you?
Oh, I was just about to say that's the only one I know, but I use that in everything. The rule of thirds.
Yeah, I mean, you don't cut people's heads off. You don't cut them in weird positions. You know, you try to think about these things, and that's what's really hard about artists, and that's to me what separates a really good artist from kind of an average artist. And I imagine there's things in writing as well where there's just do's and don'ts. But as an artist, that's where kind of I grew up as. That's what I did for so long. You know, doing digital colors. You know, you pull from trying to make things the best you can or the best of your ability at that time. And so yeah, there's all kinds of influences out there. You just gotta look for them. You know.
Absolutely. Well, this was a pretty informative and fun little podcast. I think we went for quite a while, so that's I think that'll be good for the fans.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I would just give a shout out to anybody that sees this. You know, feel free to hit me up on social media.
I was gonna say, shout out your any place that like where do you want people to go to first, and where are all the other places they can find you?
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm on Facebook. I guess I found out there's other Todd Rayners on Facebook, but I have probably the coolest avatar. So, I mean, it's all Icepick. So if you find a guy with Icepick, that's me. And everything is Todd Rayner Art. So my Twitter is Todd Rayner Art. Instagram is Todd Rayner Art. So feel free to hit me up. You know, should be at RenCon here in a few weeks, which is September 7th and 8th. It's a 2-day show. It's in Renton, Washington. And I'll be at Rose City. What is that, the 14th, 15th, and 16th-ish, like that weekend. I'll be down there. And then I actually am doing a show in late October, which is Jet City, which is in Tacoma, Washington. So, you know, the next few months, I will be out there. I'd love to try to get issue 3 done. I'm wrapping up the inks here in the next week or so, and then on to colors. And if I can get those done in time to print before any of these shows, we'll have kind of a early release of issue 3 before the Indiegogo actually wraps up. But yeah, feel free to follow me there. And, you know, if anybody needs anything, I'm definitely available. So yeah.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll definitely talk to you later.
All right. You got it, guys. Later.